flower to understand the process. This is the stamen, the male reproductive part of a flower. It consists of the filament and anther. The filament is the stalk of the anther. The anther produces yellowish pollen grains from the pollen sacs inside it. That's the yellow stuff that you got on your hands when you touched the flower. In the same way, when an anther brushes against an insect, say a butterfly, some pollen grains stick to the insect. For fertilization, these pollen grains need to be transferred to a stigma. This process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma is known as pollination.
Stigma of the same flower or a different flower?
Well, in bisexual flowers it could happen both ways. If this transfer of pollen occurs in the same flower, it is referred to as self-pollination. On the other hand, if the pollen is transferred from one flower to another, it is known as cross-pollination.
So how exactly does pollen reach the female reproductive part of another flower?
Through agents like wind, water, animals, birds, insects, and of course, human beings.
Ah, human beings like me?
Ha! Yes, you could be an agent too. See that butterfly sitting on the flower? Butterflies often take these pollen grains to the female reproductive part or the carpel of another flower.
You know, I was wondering what exactly attracts agents like the butterfly to these flowers. I read up a bit and this is what I found. We spoke about petals earlier, remember? Petals function to attract insects or bird pollinators through color, scent, and nectar, which may be secreted in some part of the flower. For example, hibiscus petals use vibrant colors as well as nectar to attract pollinating agents such as hummingbirds. Flowers pollinated by night visitors such as bats or moths are likely to concentrate on scent, which can attract pollinators in the dark rather than color. Most flowers with such a scent are white. In fact, the characteristics that attract pollinators account for the popularity of flowers and flowering plants among humans. Now let's get back to the female reproductive part of the flower. A carpel is located in the center of a flower and comprises of three parts: the ovary, the style, and the stigma. Let's look at the carpel closely. The terminal part is the stigma. Try touching this stigma.
It's a little sticky. It's a little sticky, isn't it?
True. Can you guess why it needs to be sticky?
Oh, to catch the pollen grains, of course.
That's right. When the butterfly carries the pollen grains from the stamen, the stigma can trap these pollen grains in its sticky surface. Then they can travel down to the ovary for fertilization.
So the middle elongated part of the carpel is the style, and this swollen part at the bottom is the ovary?
Yes, you got it. Now let's look at the ovary. The ovary contains ovules, and each ovule has an egg cell. Now that the stigma of the hibiscus flower has received pollen grains, these grains have to reach the female germ cells which are in the ovary.
So, do the pollen grains just fall through the style to reach the ovary?
Not quite. To enable the pollen grains to reach the female germ cells, a tube grows out of the pollen grain and reaches the ovary. This tube is known as the pollen tube. This is where the fusion of the germ cells, or fertilization, takes place. During fertilization, the male germ cell produced by pollen grain fuses with the female germ cell present in the ovule. This fusion of two gametes or germ cells is also called syngamy. Syngamy produces a zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant.
So then the seeds that we see are zygotes.
Not so fast. After fertilization, the zygote divides several times to form an embryo within the ovule. The ovule then develops a tough coat and is gradually converted into a seed. These are the seeds that we use to raise new plants. But the seed is not available to us just yet. It is enclosed in the ovary that grows rapidly and ripens to form a fruit. In this process, the petals, sepals, stamens, style and stigma may shrivel and fall off. The seed inside the fruit contains the future plant or embryo which develops into a seedling under appropriate conditions. Take a look at this hibiscus plant. Fertilization has taken place and the sepals, petals, stamens, style and stigma have withered away. But the seeds are still alive.